And so that's both sides of the argument, and I think the rub is calling for this person's firing just because of identifying with the opposite sex. You know, Bobby, we got Bobby, our associate, Bobby worked together. Bobby, is this legal to fire someone just because sexual orientation or transgender?
Right. So under that Bostock case that we talked about a minute ago, the short answer to that is no. You know, there are quite a few protected classes, and now under Bostock 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court has said, you know, sexual orientation, sexual identity, those are now protected as well. So in the employment setting anyway, you cannot be fired because of how you identify yourself sexually. So the answer to that is no, but you know, of course, we'll get into that as we go.
Yeah.
And of course, somebody with the same genitalia could also harm a child there too. So it's difficult to say just because you've got somebody of. We see all kinds of news stories, right?
Right.
Anybody out there can harm a child. So where do you draw the line?
That's right.
We have got a caller already. We've got Debbie on the line with a question or comment from Huntsville. Hi, Debbie. Thank you for calling. What are your thoughts on this tonight?
My thoughts are that we should live and let live, and therefore leave other people to mind their business while we mind our business. I don't think it's my right or anyone else's to say, I'm sorry, you can't do this job because you were born a male, or because it's ridiculous.
Does it make a difference?
Debbie,
Go ahead.
Debbie, you're in favor of supporting the law and following the laws as you can't discriminate for sexual orientation or gender identity. Fair?
That's correct.
All right, let me ask you this. On the other side of the argument, let's say that you have a person with male genitalia. Should that particular person have access to the girls' dorm, in your opinion? Is that a reasonable accommodation to say, okay, that employee can work there, but just not in the girls' dorm?
It is, because I do not want my daughter in the bathroom with someone who was born a girl but is now a man. That's the whole thing just doesn't work, and I think you can't do one without the other.
And so
you
go ahead. So you would need some type of complaint or actual wrongdoing before you're going to remove that employee. Fair?
Yes, just like any other employee.
Okay. I feel like Bobby, the people that we've talked to, they are similar views with Debbie. Live and let live. If there's an allegation, then let's investigate it, make sure the children are protected. But what are some of the legal ramifications? Let's say they followed Senator Tuberville's advice or Congressman Dale Strong's advice to remove or fire this employee without any wrongdoing. Right. What's the liability for the Space and Rocket Center for wrongful termination?
So the liability there, of course, would be civil action. It's something, we see in workers' comp cases we handle and things of that nature. So they could ultimately be liable for civil damages. Of course, under Bostock, we have the EEOC. They provide a cause of action where, under this Bostock case that we keep referring to, you could actually file a complaint with the EEOC if you believe you've been discriminated against on the basis of your sexual orientation. And then it's an administrative remedy that ultimately, after the EEOC, you may then have, a private right of action, or some other administrative remedy.
Right. So the Space and Rocket Center could be liable if they follow the politician's advice in this particular case.
Yes.
And all things are not protected. So if you're delivering for your company and you've got, let's say, the South Will Rise Again hat or a Confederate hat, can your employee preclude you from wearing that hat? Probably. So the law has a fair balance to not only protect protected classes in the workplace, but also to make sure the employer has reasonable policies and procedures to perform their business in a way that's consistent with their company image. And so that has to be balanced to make sure the employer's rights and the employee's rights are taken into account. And let's be clear, Alabama law, you can be hired or fired for any reason or no reason, as long as it's not for one of these protected classes, religion, age, sex, things like that. And so you have to follow the law, but at the same time, there can be a balance for employers to make sure that their company image is protected and can go with how they want to operate their business, but you cannot discriminate against those protected classes.
So are we saying sexual orientation is a protected class, But is sexual orientation the same as gender orientation?
Well, the court
and is that
expanded
protected?
that. The court expanded that. And so basically, the Ballstock case said sexual orientation cannot be discriminated in the workplace in Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Now, the court expanded it from not only sexual orientation, but transgender individuals. And so they expanded it in that particular case. Now, and let's pivot a little bit. Alabama had a ban on same-sex marriages back in 2015. Now, the federal courts overturned that, and I believe it was Oberfeld versus Hodges. The United States Supreme Court settled that issue, so nationwide, same-sex marriage is legal. Now, that's one aspect of it. There's still issues for adoption rights, discrimination, and things like that, but states can't enact their own laws to counteract federal law. They cannot trump federal law.
That's right.
We have a clip for you. Normally we run a You Make the Law Call video. Tonight we've got a clip here. One of the news stories from WAAY 31's Paige Meyer that talked about the local tie-in with this topic with the Space and Rocket Center.
Says they're currently investigating allegations brought against one of their employees. The investigation comes after a local parent claimed a transgender woman was monitoring the girls' dorms at the space camp. Now, the parent posted his claims on social media for thousands to see, but provided no evidence of wrongdoing by the individual. Instead, he included screenshots that allegedly came from the woman's social media, unrelated to space camp. But what he found was enough for him to remove his child from space camp entirely.
And parents, they have that right to not put their child in an environment they feel to be unfit or unhealthy.
Yeah.
Other parents can opt to do that.
You're not required to do anything with your children.
That's right. You can homeschool
That's not a
them.
job.
That's right. That's right. And so, it's a good story. I think she covered the facts well. Where the rub is firing this poor employee without any wrongdoing. And what does that say in terms of protecting workers' rights in Alabama? Again, workers' rights are being, further diluted as we go, and this is another time where we have to point out the law and how you cannot discriminate against an employee based on a protected class status.
And I think we brought up an interesting point a minute ago, Will. These federal cases, this is the minimum. This is the threshold requirement. States can go further into detail if they choose to. But you can't take away what the federal government has given, what these Supreme Court cases have provided. So these rights are the minimum threshold that are provided to individuals.
And it's going to be interesting to see what the court does moving forward if these issues are addressed again. Remember, Roe versus Wade was the law of the land for a long time,
Things can be
and now
changed.
it's not. Now it's not.
We're going to take a break. We're going to come back and talk a little bit. A caller wants to talk about bathroom issues. Men go into women's bathrooms, how the law is for that. Stay with us and call in your civil commentary, 256-536-0077. We'll be right back.
watching WAAY 31 Law Call. Your rights, your calls, live. Presented by the Tennessee Valley's award-winning personal injury and wrongful death law firm, Timberlake, League & Brooks. Featuring the knowledge and experience of Attorney Michael Timberlake, Attorney Will League, Attorney Heath Brooks, Attorney William Maservi. And hosted by broadcaster and family law attorney Sharon Doviet. This is WAAY 31 Law Call.
Welcome back to 31 Law Call. Tonight we're talking about transgender rights. We've got with us Will League and Bobby Marsh from Timberlake, League & Brooks. A recent story coming in the news locally, the Space and Rocket Center and an employee there, and transgender rights. We had somebody also calling in saying, okay, what's the current situation with bathroom rights in Alabama and transgender people? What are your thoughts on that?
All right, well, it's a common question. It's a great question. And the thing of it is, I know in the employment context, employers have an obligation to provide bathroom facilities to their employees. However, there's no law right now that says, the bathroom has to be gender neutral or it has to be male and female. It's very gray. So really, it will ultimately it'd be interesting to watch how it develops over time, but very gray right now.
Yeah, and right now there's a bill passed by the legislature, headed to Ivy's desk, to not be able to talk about in elementary school, and some agree, some disagree, about sexual orientation and things like that, and that it includes the the bathroom thing. So we'll see if we'll see if Governor Ivy passes that into law.
We've got Martha on the line with a question or comment from Decatur. Hi, Martha. Thanks for calling in. What's your thoughts on this tonight?
Well, I agree mainly with what the first caller said. I believe her name was Debbie.
Right.
The thing I think maybe we don't think about or don't realize is that just because you might be transgender does not mean you are a pedophile. They're not related. I don't know the statistics.
Good point.
But you can't assume that a transgender person is a pedophile.
Good point.
And if they talked about that this person is monitoring the girls' dorms. If a person is monitoring a girl's dorm, if the girls are in any way vulnerable, there should not be an adult right there with them. And if there is an adult, there should be two, and two that are not related to each other. And then
like
they can't cover up for each other, or they hopefully wouldn't. And right. I just think it's a mountain out of a molehill.
Well, Martha, and so you hit a point there that if you're trans or gay, there has been a jump, and I'm interested in what you have to say about this. There's been a jump from that to maybe committing a crime or a pedophile or trying to indoctrinate children, and so that's the big leap I think that fear and ignorance comes into play, and so the statistics, I'm unaware that all of a sudden if you're trans or gay, you are in fact a pedophile or an increased risk to a child or somebody else. And so I agree with you that's a question that I just don't understand how you make that jump.
There was a recent Pew Research study, a 2022 study of America's thoughts, adult Americans, their thoughts on have we gone too far with transgender rights, have we gone far enough? 38% said society has gone too far with transgender rights. 36% said we haven't gone far enough. And about 25% said we're just about right. So America is divided. So Alabama is not alone in being divided.
Right. It's a topic that raises a lot of strong opinions. The upcoming election, that's part of it.
Yeah.
We're talking about the border security, and and the Republicans are talking about a couple of those issues. And is that the true focus of all the issues, or are some people voting on a couple of issues? And sometimes the answer is yes.
Let me give you an email from GT, who wrote in and said, how does recognizing transgender rights square with my First Amendment rights to freedom of speech and religion?
Bob and I were talking this earlier before the show. You can under your First Amendment rights. Now, let's go back, a little history lesson. 14th Amendment back in 1906 applied the Bill of Rights to all the states. Basically, you've got the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech. And so you can talk about for or against, but what you cannot do is any type of hate speech or speech that incites violence. Now, we've all heard about January 6th and political speech. That has an extra layer or level of protection under the Constitution. But again, that is not absolute. And if you conduct speech or engage in speech that's going to incite violence, you cannot do that. Now, you can talk about overthrowing the government, but you cannot maintain speech that actually calls people to action. And if you do, Bobby, that, I mean, it violates the law, right?
That's right. And I think it's important to remember, too, everyone has these rights. So even if we don't necessarily agree with somebody, that doesn't give us the right to, demean them or to make them feel any less of themselves, because we all have the same exact rights under this Constitution. So just an important reminder out there, even if we don't agree with each other, we can still communicate civilly, and, we can all still, don't have to get along necessarily, but recognize everyone's a person and we're all important.
We've got Robert on the line with a question or comment from Decatur. Hi, Robert. Thanks for holding. What's your question or comment tonight? What do you think?
Oh, what about religious rights? I was raised up in a church where all this is wrong, and over a flip of a night, pretty much it's like we got to deal with it. What about straight rights?
Fair enough. And do you feel like straight rights are being impinged upon?
What about how I feel?
Right. Well, okay. Now remember, there's a separation of church and state, right? And so your church, your pastor, I think, can choose not to marry same-sex couples, but I don't think they can be discriminated against in the workplace. And so let me ask you this: how do you feel like your beliefs are being impinged upon? Is it because they're kind of shoving this down your throat and you've got to deal with it, or Kevin, tell me a little bit more about that?
I worked at Jack Daniel's Cooperage, and pretty much they told us we had to deal with it.
Okay.
Deal with it like in the workplace if someone is gay or trans.
It was pretty much they forgot about the straight people.
But let me ask you this: what if you've got a gay person you're working with, what are you saying you should be able to do? Preclude that person from working,
prepare us for it. Prepare us, not just throw the person in with us. Let everybody understand. Train us.
Like a little bit more.
Okay.
A little bit more sensitivity training, or trying to understand their way of life. I'm kind of confused.
I mean, it's just like, what about how I feel? It's all about everybody else. What about straight people? I mean, it's like everybody forgot about us.
Fair enough. I mean, and you have rights as well. Just like that last question, Bobby. This caller, I mean, he can speak for it or against it, just like he does.
Exactly. So your rights are in no way going away by the topics we're discussing tonight. This is just recognizing, under these recent court cases, the court is recognizing, hey, look, in the employment context, like we're discussing, these folks cannot be fired simply because they're gay or transgender. I don't necessarily believe they're trying to impinge on anyone's rights, because like we talked about, your First Amendment rights are still very much in place, as they always have been. This is more so just expanding the classes of people that are protected from wrongful termination and things of that nature.
But it brings up a good point that, look, if they're not trained or used to that type of lifestyle, what type of training, or he said, prepare us for that, that may be something that companies could do to try and have a little more synergy in the workplace.
For sure.
Caller wants to know, okay, so does this law differentiate between people who are transgender in that they have had physical changes accomplished, or whether they just identify as the other sex? Just identify. Does it make a difference?
In the workplace, discrimination under Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, no, it does not, because it expands from gay to transgender in the workplace. Now, when you're talking about other realms, that is not exactly true.
Okay.
And so in the workplace, they cannot be discriminated against. In other ways, in other places, there's still laws, but however, they hadn't been specifically addressed by the Supreme Court like this particular issue has been in Ballstock versus Georgia.
Okay. Email question from Jay. Jay says, even if the government added trans protections at work to some new federal law, couldn't individual states just opt out of that?
I don't know if they can necessarily opt out of that. I think it really depends on the context. So, for instance, this federal law applies to employers with 15 or more employees. So if you have an employer with less than 15, perhaps they could. But it would ultimately depend on what type of business are we talking about. Are we talking about a private business? Is this something that has some sort of government entity or government action tied to it? So I think really that question will depend on the type of business that we're talking about, and ultimately the type of state type of state statutes that we're discussing.
You know, and that last caller brought up a good point. You know, there's a case, and honestly, I can't remember the outcome, but remember the case where you had the cake makers?
Yep.
And they refused
The wedding cake.
the wedding cake, and they refused to make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple.
Yes.
And I believe the
I think
court
they said it was they said it was their
their
religious
religious-
right.
So that would be within that last caller's right. Say, look, I do not have to participate in that if I don't want to. I believe that was the outcome of that case, and
Yes,
so
I
that
believe so.
protects. You know, as that last caller was talking about, protects his rights as well to not participate. But again, that's differentiated between if you're in the workplace. So interesting stuff.
We're going to take a break. Be right back, hearing more of your thoughts and comments on transgender rights. Stay with us. If you didn't get your questions answered tonight, here's how to get in touch with Will League and Bobby Marsh with Timberlake League and Brooks, 256-536-0770 or 800-804-2502. The website is law-injury.com, and if you like them on Facebook, you can learn more about the law that way.
And we've got our very own Sharon Doviet, family law attorney, child custody and divorce, 539-7337, SharonFamilyLaw.com.
And we're out of time. Thanks for all your calls, your comments. Very interesting. We'll see you next week.
Good night.